What is up, everybody? Today it's the Art Economist, and I'm going to be talking to you guys about the starving artist myth. So let's start with what we're told today. The cultural narrative goes like this: artists must suffer for their craft. Money corrupts creativity. Real artists don't care about compensation. Passion is its own payment. If you're worried about making a living, then you're not a true artist. You should be grateful for the exposure. Don't it sound familiar? This whole mythology romanticizes poverty as some essential, even noble part of the artistic journey. Like suffering is what gives art its authenticity. But here's what this narrative actually does in practice. It justifies paying artists poverty wages, while everybody else in the value chain makes a crap load of money. Publishers profit, galleries take their cut, streaming platforms make billions, brands get their content, but the artist, you should just be happy that somebody wants their work, They're told to work for the exposure, the portfolio, for the love of the craft, for the vibes. And if they dare ask for fair compensation, whoa, you a sellout, brother. If you ain't a real artist, you care about more about the money than the art. Anyway, it's a perfect system of wage suppression disguised as artistic purity. And artists internalize it. They feel guilty for wanting to pay rent. They undervalue their work. They apologize for needing to eat. The mythology becomes self-reinforcing, and that's exactly the point. But it wasn't always like this. Before Romanticism swept through Europe in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, art was treated very differently. It was a trade, like plumbing, like construction, like carpentry. Artists were craft people who learned their skills through formal apprenticeship systems. They belonged to guilds, which were essentially medieval and Renaissance era labor unions. These guilds regulated training, set quality standards, and yes, negotiated compensation. Artists ran professional workshops, often employing multiple apprentices and assistants. They took commissions from clients, worked to specifications, met deadlines, signed contracts, and were expected to be paid. Paid well, actually. Think about what most Renaissance art actually was. It was commissioned work. A patron would come to an artist and say, "Hey, paint this saint for my chapel," or, sculpt my tomb, bro, or decorate this palace. The artist would negotiate terms, agree on a price, deliver the work, and then get paid. It was a business transaction between a skilled professional and a client. And nobody thought that this made them less legitimate as artists. Nobody said that Michelangelo was a sellout because he charged money for his sculptures. The idea that business acumen and artistic excellence were somehow in tension with each other would have seemed completely bizarre to them. They were complementary. Of course, great artists should be well compensated. That's what made the whole system work. So let's look at some specific examples. Because the reality of these Renaissance masters is nothing like the starving artist myth. Michelangelo was a shrewd businessman. He negotiated hard with his patrons. He played them against each other to drive up his price. He was constantly writing letters about complaining about money, not because he was getting paid, not because he wasn't getting paid, but because he wanted more money. He accumulated serious wealth over his lifetime and died rich, leaving a substantial estate. If I remember correctly, he had thousands of gold coins hidden in a safe, And the Sistine Chapel, one of the most celebrated works of art history, he fucking hated that project. In fact, the Pope went to him for that project because, I think it was Raphael's master at the time. Well, not master, but teacher, basically wanted to sabotage Michelangelo's career. He considered himself a sculptor, Michelangelo, not a painter. He took it because Pope Julius II insisted and because the Pope paid him well. It was a job. Leonardo da Vinci was wealthy. He received regular salaries from dukes and other patrons. He hustled for commissions constantly. He did engineering engineering consulting on the side, designing weapons, planning cities, solving technical problems for money. He even had a LinkedIn resume, or well, the Renaissance era version of it, And the Mona Lisa was just a commission of a Florentine merchant's wife. Da Vinci was supposed to deliver it, get paid, and moved on. Instead, he kept the painting for 16 years, constantly tinkering with it and experimenting with many techniques. That's not essentially a romantic artistic vision. That's a contractor who never finished his job. Kind of a dick move, honestly. Rubens ran what was essentially a successful business with employees and production systems. Durer understood mass production and branding. He made prints and sold them widely. Titian was reportedly one of the wealthiest painters of his entire era. These weren't tortured souls creating in poverty. They were skilled professionals who understood their market value and demanded to be compensated accordingly. The works we see now in museums as pure artistic expression were, in their time, products of professional labor. And at that time, it didn't diminish them. If anything, the professionalism elevated the work. So if artists used to be well-compensated professionals, well, where did the starving artist myth come from? Great question. It's the Romantics. Yeah, the Romantic movement in the late 1700s and early 1800s completely reframed how we think about artists and art. The Romantics created this whole mythology around the tortured genius, the artist suffering in a freezing garret, misunderstood by their materialistic bourgeoisie society, creating purely for art's sake rather than money. Note that the Romantic movement was a sort of counteraction to the Enlightenment movement. Anyway, the artist was a sensitive soul, too pure and elevated for mundane concerns like paying rent. So, suffering is romantic. Poverty is noble. Commercial success becomes, wait a minute, you're a fucking sellout. But here's the absolutely crucial thing to understand. The people that created and popularized this mythology, they were not broke themselves. They were cosplaying poverty from a position of financial security. Lord Byron, Mr. Byronic hero, that's what it meant. He made that stuff. He was a lord. He inherited a title and an estate. He was traveling around Europe being scandalous and writing poetry funded by family wealth. Percy Shelley came from a wealthy family. He went to Eton, I guess, one of England's most elite schools. Then Oxford. He had a trust fund. When he got temporarily cut off from some of his inheritance, he still had money coming in from other sources. His version of struggling was being slightly less rich than he could have been. These guys could actually afford to romanticize poverty because they weren't at risk of experiencing real poverty. They had family money and whatnot, social connections, education, writing poetry about the nobility of the poor artists while living comfortable lives themselves. And they created a moral framework where real art requires suffering, where commercial success is corrupting, where caring about the money that you make makes you a sellout, where material concerns are beneath true artistes. This ideology spread through European culture and eventually became the dominant way that we think about art and artists. So how is it weaponized? That romantic ideology gets weaponized by other wealthy people to justify not paying artists. The framework becomes, well, economic success is selling out, bum. Real art requires suffering. True artists don't care about the money. And this is incredibly convenient for everybody who benefits from cheap creative labor. Publishers, galleries, streaming platforms, brands, clients, they all profit enormously when artists accept poverty wages or work for free. The pitch is always fucking the same, you know what I'm saying? The artist asks for compensation and gets told, whoa, you asking for money, bro? I thought you were a real artist, I didn't know you was one of them fake sellouts. Real artists don't care about being paid. They care about the path. They care about their craft. This is actually an amazing opportunity for exposure. Isn't the work itself rewarding enough? And the thing is that the person giving this speech is running a profitable business. They're not working for free out of passion. They expect to be compensated. They expect to be compensated for their labor. They're convinced that artists are a special category of worker who should be grateful for the opportunity to work for nothing. It is a perfect trap. Organizing for better pay makes you look like a mercenary sellout rather than a worker advocating for fair compensation. Meanwhile, plumbers organize into unions and nobody questions whether they really love pipes or are in it for the right reasons. But artists, well, they're supposed to transcend such basic concerns like wage suppression and not being paid well. And what I'm trying to say is that artists internalize this. Some artists internalize this. They undervalue their own work. They feel guilty for charging what they're worth. They apologize for needing to pay bills. The mythology becomes self-reinforcing. Asking for fair pay feels like you're admitting you're a fraud, like proving you don't really care about the art. It is psychological wage suppression dressed up as artistic integrity. Now, we're going to talk about some Vincent van Gogh here because he's the ultimate poster child for the starving artist myth. The story that we're told is simple. A brilliant artist that was too pure and visionary for this world died in poverty because society didn't appreciate his genius. And now his platform paintings sell for hundreds of millions. It's the perfect validation of the suffering artist narrative. Yes, his art didn't sell much during his lifetime. Yes, he died poor, but the reason for that had very little to do with society not appreciating his artistic vision. This guy was not well in the head, okay? He had severe episodes of psychosis. He struggled with a depression. He had substance abuse problems. Epstein? My apologies, I'm not well read. Tobacco. Other things that made his health worse and drained what money he had. He was self-destructive in ways that went far beyond just being misunderstood by the art market. His brother Theo was regularly sending him money. The problem wasn't that his art didn't sell. The problem was that he was unwell in the head and no amount of money was going to fix that. Maybe, as a suggestion, we shouldn't be holding up died at 37 after years of profound mental anguish as the ideal artist career path. Maybe that's actually extremely horrifying. But what do I know? I'm an economist. I'm not a fucking artist. Anyway, we're going to bring this all together, guys. The starving artist myth was created by wealthy romantics who could afford to romanticize poverty because they weren't actually at risk of experiencing it. They created this ideology where suffering was noble, where commercial success was lame, and where real artists transcended material concerns like food and water. Then that ideology was picked up and weaponized by wealthy businesses and clients to justify not paying artists. It's a tool of wage suppression. You ask for fair compensation, you're a bum. You should do it for exposure. But anyway, art is work, and creating art requires skill and training and time and effort and expertise. Artists are workers, and because they are workers, they deserve fair compensation. So, the starving artist myth is a scam that justified wage suppression. And it's time that we stop falling for it. So anyway, like, comment, subscribe. If I expanded your mind and fertilized your brain, subscribe, do all that, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace.